Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michelle Winthrop. I am the Director of Policy for Irish Aid, which is the Irish Government's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. This presentation is going to address theme number 4, which is gender mainstreaming, lessons from Ireland's international development and domestic action. Ireland has been consistent in championing the need for gender-responsive climate action, particularly through our international engagement. There's a simple reason for this. This is because we believe that without addressing the unique needs of men and women in climate action, but also without capturing the unique contributions that men and women make to the challenges that climate change poses, we will not be successful in implementing effective climate action, particularly that addresses the needs of the poorest. In addition to our international engagement, we are striving to encourage a more gender-responsive approach to our national climate action. We are in the process of revising our climate action plan at the moment, and gender will be a strong feature of the revised plan, and I'll speak more on that in a moment. This presentation will address both our international engagement and lessons we are seeing from our domestic climate action efforts. Last year, in 2019, we launched our international development policy. This was called A Better World, and within this policy, it highlighted 4 key policy priorities. In addition to reducing humanitarian need and improved governance, it also included climate action and gender equality as priorities for our international engagement. Key to success, of course, is the interaction between those 2 pillars, gender equality and climate action, particularly in terms of the programmes that the Irish government supports on the ground. Within that, those programmes are largely focused on a number of specific areas: food systems, including agricultural development, small and medium enterprise development in the agri-food sector and nutrition, a focus on people, largely looking at basic services such as health and education, and a focus on protection, which includes support for the most vulnerable in highly fragile contexts, as well as universal social protection. This schema shows the how the policy priorities and the areas for intervention within our policy fit together. I've included it because I wanted to highlight at the top the guiding principle that is to inform both policy engagement and interventions is ensuring that the needs of the furthest behind are met first. And that is a very strong policy commitment, which, as I said, really does guide all of our engagement right across the board. I believe that is very consistent with championing gender issues within climate action. So how do we actually engage on gender responsive climate action? Well, we have a number of entry points, really. The first and probably the most important is our work with civil society and research organisations to build the evidence base for ensuring gender is addressed in climate programmes and projects. We have a partnership with the Women's Environment and Development Organisation, WEDO, who are very active within UNFCCC as well as in other networks, and a long-standing partnership with the International Institute for Environment and Development, IIED, who are also strengthening their focus on gender. The second area where we engage is using our voice on international climate finance instruments, for example, the Green Climate Fund, to ensure that they have gender policies in place and, crucially, that they are being implemented appropriately and that the resources are being put in place to ensure their implementation. Thirdly, we are strongly supporting national gender and climate focal points, partly through WEDO, but also partly through support to the UNFCCC Secretariat. And particularly, we have a focus on the needs of those focal points within least developed countries, because typically we find least developed countries face the most severe impacts and adaptation needs, but also have the least capacity to work with evidence and build gender into their risk and vulnerability assessments. In 2018, we produced a policy brief to highlight some of the issues on gender responsive climate action, and it was called Women as Agents of Change Towards a Transformational Gender Responsive Climate Agenda. That is available online. I'm happy to share the link for it. A key message of this policy brief was that women's leadership is important in climate action. And as I mentioned before, yes, women have unique needs in terms of climate vulnerability, but really we must move beyond the victim narrative that has prevailed in a number of years. A key part of ensuring that women's leadership is secured in the climate process is making sure they have a voice at the table. There are lots of areas of work on ensuring gender equal UNFCCC national delegations and so on. But really we wanted to ensure that grassroots women's voice is also heard. During COP23, we were delighted to have invited a farmer from Uganda, a wonderful lady called Constance Okanza, to join the Irish delegation to COP23. And that provided her with a platform to be able to speak about her own experiences and indeed broader gender issues, as well as access to finance in various forums. Generally, we abide by the principle of nothing for us without us. So it's important that women who are experiencing the real impacts and who have the most contribution to make have an opportunity to have their voices heard. Domestically then in Ireland, we have for a number of years had in place a national strategy for women and girls, which spans across all sectors. And of course in 2019, we finalised an ambitious national climate action plan. Since then, we have had a change of government, which has reinforced commitment to climate action. And so that climate action plan is in the process of being revised to reflect the new commitment by the new government to 7% annual reduction in emissions, among other things. In the Irish context, gender and climate issues are indeed highly complex. And it's important to highlight the fact that they vary enormously across geographical areas and indeed from sector to sector. But what I can say for sure is that we don't entirely understand the dynamics between gender equality and climate issues in Ireland. So there's a broad-based recognition within the government that we have an urgent need for gathering more data and more operational research on, first of all, in the Irish context, how climate affects women and men differently, and secondly, what role women have in business, in government, in civil society, and in their families to really exercise leadership on climate action. And once we understand that, that can inform future iterations of the plan to really develop a climate responsive, a gender responsive, climate response. One thing that is important is that governance structures do matter in ensuring accountability. So in Ireland, we have established a powerful National Climate Action Council, which oversees implementation of the plan and has authority over the various instruments of government who are responsible for bits of the plan, and indeed is a very helpful entry point for trying to mainstream gender issues across the board. Another area of strength that we have in this regard, the basis upon which to build a truly gender-responsive climate action, is the progress we have made in recent years in getting girls to study science, technology, engineering and mathematics, STEM subjects, at secondary school and indeed in university. And I think this is evidenced by the fact that youth climate activism in Ireland has been very strong, particularly in the last couple of years, and that we have had a very strong young female voice in that activism. Indeed, also, there is a big push to encourage leadership by women in politics and in public life, and we are making steady progress in that regard. The strong emphasis on the encouragement of girls to study STEM, I believe, is a key triggering factor which is going to drive future climate action and making sure that women's voices are heard at the table. And I really do believe that at the moment we are fostering a generation of women climate leaders of the future. A nice example of this is for many, many years in Ireland, we have held what we call a Young Scientists competition for secondary school pupils. And in recent years, we are seeing an exponential growth in the representation of girls as finalists, as winners, and as competitors. But also we are seeing an exponential increase in the attention being paid to climate in the projects that students are coming forward with. So to conclude, really, I would like to highlight a few key ingredients that we observe for successful gender responsive climate action. The first one really is the need for a localized approach. Localization in focus, in the analysis undertaken, and indeed in implementation, I believe is most likely to ensure women's voices are heard. Local governments, local civil society networks, and indeed communities have a really, really strong role to play. In addition to that, as I referred to before, a focus on sectors is important. In the UNFCCC, there is a tendency to interact at a cross-sectoral level, and that is valid. But really, when it comes to implementation and indeed capturing the role of men and women, you really do have to get into the detail of a sectoral of a sectoral reality. The second point is, particularly on the international stage, there is an argument, I believe, for setting targets for spending. It would be a very powerful thing indeed if parties to the UNFCCC could agree a percentage target for investment in climate action that is gender responsive, in the same way that we set targets for adaptation and mitigation. I think that has a tendency to focus minds and really will drive the sort of implementation that we want to see, that's proactive and meaningfully addresses gender issues. The third point I'd like to highlight is to ensure that the governance and accountability framework is right and can drive action, and importantly, can drive corrective action. Much of ill-conceived climate action projects and programs can actually cause damage to women's rights and the struggle for gender equality. And so it is important that we can correct actions, take an adaptive approach to management. And it's only by having the appropriate governance and accountability framework in place can we do that effectively. Lastly, speaking of flexibility, it is important that policy and implementation instruments, national plans, sector plans, NDCs are flexible and can importantly respond to emerging trends and solid analysis that is being undertaken around gender impacts of climate change and the role of women in addressing mitigation and adaptation. So those are the four key areas that I would highlight that should inform a successful gender responsive approach to climate action. I will leave it there. All's to say is thank you, or in our own language in Ireland, Gurav Mahagwiv, and I hope you have a successful rest of the session. Thank you very much.